Welcome to this session. I'm here with Teresa Mwesikwa, and we're together for the session discussing how to future-proof education. Terry has an unbelievable story. She was an active participant in a program called SSP, and we're going to talk about that program and understand it, and understand how it's really impacted her life and her future. I'm really, really excited to have you in the studio. Welcome, Terry. It's great to see you.
Very happy to be here. Thanks for having me, Adam.
Absolutely fantastic. So please will you start off by telling us a little bit about your life and about yourself?
Ooh, how long do we have? All right. So my name is Teresa Mwesikwa, as you've just said. I was born in Nelspruit to a Ugandan dad and a Swazi mother, and very shortly afterwards moved to Soweto, which is where I spent the bulk of my life after my dad passed away in 1994. And living in Soweto, growing up in the 90s in Soweto, was an adventure, as anyone will tell you who lived through that experience. And it taught me an incredible amount about the world and about the country that we live in. So lived in Soweto for a little bit. Then my mother fell ill around 2003, and I moved to Centurion to live with my sister whilst my mother recovered. And then that is where and when I was introduced to SSP. So at the end of my primary school education, one of my teachers comes into the classroom, tells us about the student sponsorship program and that she has forms. And if anyone is interested, please come to me after class. I'll make a couple of photocopies and you can fill them out. And so the story begins, really. Filled out the forms, was very successful in the recruiting process, and then ended up moving back to Soweto. I think I'm getting ahead of the story a little bit, Adam. But yeah.
It's fantastic. It's truly an unbelievable story. I had the great honor of hearing you the other night at a Signals and Entrepreneurship program you attended. You basically just blew everyone away. It was just an unbelievable story. So let's jump right back into that story. And you're saying that you got these forms. You took the initiative. Is that correct?
Yes, and it was fundamentally based on need. I think my mom had just recovered from her sort of long-term chronic illness, and she wasn't working at the time, and there was no real plan for high school for me. And so when the teacher said that here's funding available for high school, I thought, well, I don't remember there being a clear plan for high school, so let me see what's cooking on the other side of these forms. And so that was really what spurred me on to approach the teacher and find out more and throw myself into the SSP boat, or jump onto the boat.
And I mean, going through those immensely challenging times, and I'm so sorry to hear about the passing of your father and also your mother's illness at the time. It must have been unbelievable in terms of having the foresight to, at such a time of turmoil, to see the opportunity and to seize it. Sounds very mature for someone who is that age. So I have to commend you from the start on that. That's incredible. And knowing you, the person who you are now, even though we've met just briefly, it makes perfect sense to me. It's just, resonates as to the person you are and how you were able to do that. So that's incredible. So you filled in these forms and you had a good and successful recruitment program, and you then entered into the SSP program. So yes. Before we go on with your story, tell us a little bit about what the program is about and what it stands to serve, how it stands to serve people.
Awesome. So the SSP stands for the Student Sponsorship Program. It's a nonprofit that aims to identify high potential youth from disadvantaged backgrounds and arm them with a high quality education and develop the kinds of leaders that South Africa needs. And SSP is now 21. It was founded all the way in in the year 2000 by one Teresa Clark, so namesake, yay. And I forget, I forget who the other co-founder is, but they had this vision that the future of South Africa needs good and sound leadership, and that leadership potential exists in youth everywhere, but especially in youth from disadvantaged backgrounds. And so they decided that they're going to start this nonprofit where they identify these high potential youths and fund them, arm them with a very high quality high school education, and I guess set their lives on a completely different trajectory than what they would have been on otherwise. And yeah, my life is case in point.
So having had no plan for high school yourself, you saw this opportunity to say, let me get involved with this program. I mean, the program is, of course, visionary. I think we'll come back to talking more about the program in a little while. But for you, you entered into the program then and you got yourself into high school.
Yeah. So at that stage, one of the partner schools that SSP still has is Red Hill School. And at that stage, they were still placing all of us. I'm not sure how the program has evolved at this point, but at the time we were being placed specifically into a partner school. And I had the great fortune of being placed at Red Hill School. And I still say that that was probably one of the greatest fortunes of my life because of the experience I had there, because of the friends that I got to make there, because of the teachers who were so incredibly influential in my life at the time, and the support system that I managed to have at school, even beyond what I had at home. All of that was just the perfect coming together, the confluence of just some really, really great fortune, great luck, and some serious divine blessings.
Well, it's an amazing outlook. I hear great things about Red Hill School, and I know it's a leader, and it's great to hear your experience at the school. You mentioned when you spoke to us the other night that you were living in these two worlds. Can you say a little bit more about that and how that felt and what that was like?
Happy to. So for high school, from living with my sister in Centurion, I moved back to Soweto, not far from the Hector Peterson Museum. And I used to catch this orange Patco bus to Sandton every day, every morning for school, and then catch the bus back in the afternoon from Sandton to Soweto. And so I was living in these two worlds, but the more I engaged in the second world, the less I belonged in the first one. And so my upbringing and everything that Soweto had created me to be, and everything that I'd learned from the culture to the people to the way of life was completely ingrained in me. And I was now getting on a bus every morning, driving to Sandton, which is a completely different part of the country, and in some ways a completely different world. And so learning how to survive and navigate in that space as well was quite challenging right at the beginning. But by the end of it, I found myself sort of a little bit more comfortable in the Sandton world and equally comfortable in the Soweto world. And I think that's something that I'm grateful to have experienced. And that opportunity to get to experience everything that South Africa is. I think every time I read about the vast inequality that exists in the country, I sometimes go back to that period in my life and realize that I lived through it and I got to witness it every single day. The biggest joke I always tell is going through primary school, my highest ambition was to have my parents pick me up from school in a car. And then I got to Red Hill and people have drivers. And I was just like, wow, this is a whole new level that's being unlocked. So it was an interesting, it was a developmental experience more than anything. And I'm glad to have lived through it, although at the time it was quite challenging.
Sure, hearing you speak about it, I have so much on my mind. I mean, the one thing is that it's like there's this metaphor in there that's about education being a bridge in general, right? And you lived that, you embodied that. There's a metaphor that education can uplift people and societies, and you've lived that. So I'm very, very inspired chatting to you and hearing your story. I think it must have been challenging at times, and to hear you have such a positive view on it is amazing. So maybe let me ask you about your positivity first. How did you maintain positivity through such a challenge?
I wasn't always like this. I'll be honest. I remember right at the beginning having, I think Busi called it a class shock, just because this was a whole new class that I was experiencing and being exposed to for the very first time. And to be experiencing all of that at 13, I think was a little bit too soon. And it it forced me to very quickly come to terms with what I think I bring to any space. And so at Red Hill, I held on to the fact that SSP placed me in this environment because there's something there. They've identified some type, some potential, some intellect. There's something here that I bring to the school. There's a reason why I'm here. And so I managed to hold on to that. And I would devour books in the library. I would do my best to excel in school because that was the one thing that I felt I could bring to this environment and to the space. And that was the one thing that made me worthy and deserving to be here. And so that's what I try to focus on. But it took a while. It did not come. That was not a realization that came to me on the first day. I'll put it to you that way.
Well, that makes perfect sense, and it's amazing and astounding how you handled it and managed it. The next question that I suppose comes to mind is that I recognize you must have had great resilience through all of that as a young person, really, because you were entering into this entirely new social group entirely on your own, which must have been very daunting. So, can you share a little bit of your view on resilience?
Ooh, resilience. I have a friend who is a psychologist and says that she believes that resilience should be retermed inner strength because that's really what all of us lean on when times get tough. And so I have now adopted that belief and think that it all comes down to inner strength. And for me, it was all about keeping one's eye on the prize. There's lots that can distract you. There's lots that can derail you at any particular moment or point in time. But I think if you maintain a clear view, I think Simon Sinek says it better. He says that you need to discover your why, and if you know your why, then you can bear with any how. And so that really came alive in high school, and that's what kept me going even during university, sort of medical school, when things get tough, when we're touching subjects that I'm not really excited by. Just having that clear vision as to why am I here, why am I doing what I'm doing, made it a little bit easier to get through the more unsavory, more jarring parts of the experience, both in high school and at university.
It's a phenomenal outlook. And I love that quote that you mentioned. It's a fantastic quote. It's funnily enough a quote that I had in a talk that I did just a week ago. So the fact that you raised it is, I don't know, it's phenomenal. It's bizarre. Okay, very interesting to hear.
Yeah.
Yes, another thing that comes to mind is you spoke about these two worlds you were in and how the first world had been entrenched in you and in your thinking and in your identity. And the second world had maybe extended you into a new way of thinking. I think sometimes these uncommon experiences bring out amazing things in people because there's no one like you, right? There's no neurological system out there in the universe just that has experienced these inputs and outputs and these unique scenarios the way that you
Yeah.
have. And it applies to every phenomenal human being out there with so much potential. But from your story, it sounds like you really focused on actualizing that potential. You had that why, that purpose. So let's discuss what happened after school. What did you pursue, and what have you become?
Awesome. All right. So I think I'll start at the beginning. So where all of this starts to come to life for me towards the tail end of high school. Um, okay, let me do a spoiler alert quickly. I ended up studying medicine, becoming a doctor, and developing a passion for public health. But all of this started sort of towards the tail end of high school. I'd already decided that I wanted to be a doctor. At that point, I had an interest in neurology, neuroscience, and I thought that someday, one day, I'd become either a neurologist or a neurosurgeon. And then I think the doctor strike happens around about 2008. And in the newspapers, there are all these exposés about babies dying in hospitals because of poor hospital management, et cetera, et cetera. And that's when I was awakened to the disparities that exist in our health system. And so the passion for medicine and neurology became a passion for people more broadly, and recognizing that healthcare is an enabler of human potential, the realization of human potential, that if you're sick, if you're distracted by illness, by injury, then there's no way that you can sit and dream up all these amazing things that you can one day become. And so then my passion for public health was born in that space. And coupled with my experience in SSP from, again, in 2007, 2008, I realized the incredible power of education. And that happened when I was walking with two of my childhood friends to the local supermarket up the road. And as we were walking, we passed the construction site of the Mandela Sisulu Clinic, which is just up the road from the Hector Peterson Museum. And as we were passing there, my two friends remarked like, "Oh, this is so cool. We're getting a new clinic that's so close to where we live. This is where our kids are going to be born someday." And at the very same time that they were saying this, I was thinking, this is where I'll work as a doctor someday. And so that experience highlighted the importance of education. And so also as an enabler of human potential. And so off the back of that, my passion for public health becomes the desire to impact people's lives more broadly, to enable human potential. And how I always used to explain it is, healthcare and education are equally important. I don't know that I could ever be a teacher, but you also can't teach a sick or a hungry child. So I'll do what I can for sick and hungry children and hope that the education system also evolves to eventually be able to teach and provide quality education to those now healthy children that are passing through the system.
It's astonishing. It really is. That moment where you knew your future, it just unfolded for you. You just had a clarity of thought around it.
I think it evolved over time. I think it was a combination of my interests and at that stage, what I thought I could bring to the world. So that sort of intersection between what you want, what you're good at, and what the world needs. I think the first one isn't what you want, but yes, exactly. So in hindsight, I think it was my ikigai moment where I thought, okay, there's something here about management and leadership. And I think that's what I can bring to the world. But there's also this thing about enabling human potential that I'm really excited about and want to spend the rest of my life doing. And so it evolved over time. And of course, now in my current role, sort of supporting the COVID vaccine rollout across the country. I was saying to a friend earlier on that in 2010, when I was in matric, SSP also turned 10 years old. And so they did a profile of a couple of current scholars. I was one of those current scholars. And I remember the interviewer asking me at the time, where do you see yourself in 10 years' time? And I recently came across the video the answer I gave at that point was that I'd be a qualified medical doctor and I would be specializing in public health and rewriting history for South Africa and the world. And sort of 10 years later, what that young Terry spoke into exist, or what that young Terry spoke turned out to be exactly what we're seeing sort of 10 years and some change later. So young Terry sort of spoke all of this into existence.
Incredible.
So
I
yeah.
mean, totally my belief is that you end up creating your future because you train your RAS, your reticular activating system, to
Mm.
discern certain cues. And if you're open to those, then you create that reality for your future. And it's something I'm constantly thinking about, you know? So
Sure.
I'm so glad to hear that from you, that you literally 10 years later, you created your own future. Here you are fulfilling that exact description of your future self. 10 years later, you are involved in and supporting the COVID-19 vaccine effort in South Africa, which is a critical public health concern, as we all know, having just lived through the worst part of the pandemic, hopefully, you know, which is in the past, thanks to the future vaccination. So, and of course, the attenuation of the virus over time, hopefully. But that is that is a really, really cool story. So, what are some of your learnings from the work that you're currently doing?
The current work that I've been doing has been a real education in our health system and how that system varies province by province with so the system varies province by province because different provinces have different resources, but also different provinces have different health administration capacities. And I've seen that come to life quite starkly in the last 6 months in supporting the different provinces that I'm supporting. And it's been interesting to do the research and look into some of the reasons why that is. And it goes all the way back to apartheid spatial planning, health planning, and all of that. And it's interesting how that has been sustained sort of all these years later and we're still living through it. I mean, of course, this is true of our health system, but it's true for many other parts of our country and many other sectors, in that there's still that legacy of apartheid that we are still living through and confronting every day. But that's been the biggest learning, is just the different capacities and how the health systems require. Also, there's health system strengthening, and across the country we need that. But that doesn't mean the same thing for every provincial department of health or for every health system that exists in the different provinces.
Well, thank you so much for the work that you're doing to address this and to hopefully work towards closing those gaps that exist from the past.
Yeah.
It is fascinating work. If we think back to your story and we project forward, where will you be in 10 years from now? What's ahead for you? Not to put you on the spot on a prediction or anything, but what future Terry are you building from here?
So future Terry is trying to enable human potential supercharged. So in the short term, trying to get into business school and from there break into venture capital, where hopefully I'll have some serious funds to deploy in the direction of healthcare and education, and particularly funding and supporting entrepreneurs who are building some of the solutions that will really unlock the potential that exists on the African continent. So people building solutions in healthcare to democratize the access to quality healthcare, people doing the same in education, democratizing access to quality education. And in 10 years' time, maybe that plays itself out as getting to found or establish a sort of Pan-African social impact fund, where we get to do all of that at scale. So investing in entrepreneurs across the continent, hopefully funded by some African governments, and the returns of that being plowed back into the country's revenue, so that not only are they funding the growth and scale of education and healthcare solutions, but also the economic upside of that is experienced by services that government is able to deliver to the very same people. So sort of just spiral all of that goodness. Or
Amazing.
snowball, yeah.
Snowball, all of that goodness. It sounds incredible. It sounds like you have a very clear picture for your future, and that work is critically important. I know there will be some VCs listening probably to our conference today. So, well, at the Singularity Summit. So watch out for future Terry. This is really, really astonishing. Now, if we just take it back again to that moment of young Terry looking forward and filling in those forms, if that life-changing moment hadn't happened, do you see that your world would have been completely different? How do you feel about reflecting on that?
Sure. The life not lived. I think I sometimes think about it and I get to see it in the lives of my childhood friends. And so I think the road not traveled probably results in me going to a high school, maybe a local high school, former Model C high school, um, maybe still ending up as a medical student at UCT. But I think my vision of what's possible is maybe a little bit narrower. And so I'm not imagining myself studying towards an MBA degree at a world-class institution like Harvard, Stanford, LBS, all these really top-notch schools. Maybe I don't see myself going quite that far. I think maybe alternate Terry. Graduates from medical school is quite content to continue in clinical practice and make a difference within her sphere of influence, be that the hospital where I'm working in, be it the clinic that I'm working in. But I don't know that I have all these big, weird, wonderful ideas as to what is possible for me. And I think that's the other lesson that I took away from the SSP experience, which is that more is possible. And so even as I sit here today, and even though I've described the 10-year vision, I think a part of me thinks that once I've seen a little bit more, that vision might evolve. So that's really what the SSP experience did for me. It taught me that more is possible.
Now, I asked you a very difficult question there, and I really appreciate your answer. It's that I think full credits to the SSP program. It sounds like a program worth supporting. We need to enable the people in our nation as much as possible. And like we said, that education builds a massive, massive bridge. It really builds a bridge between different worlds, between different ways of thinking. And it sounds like it's been a big enabler for you. Full credits to Red Hill, but I think the majority of the credits must go to you for the way that you were able to take that opportunity, grasp it, and focus on it, and try and avoid those distractions. Imagine your future self, and then just go for it. Just work towards it. It's truly wonderful.
Thank you. But I think I'll take all of that credit and pass it on to every single person who was there along the journey, sort of carrying me through. From my mother and the vision she had for my education at the very beginning, right through to friends at Red Hill, parents at Red Hill, and everyone else along that journey. I think I cannot at all take the credit, take the bulk of the credit, because it really is, it has taken a village. And I think that's also part of what informs my belief in sort of enabling that human potential, is that it really does take a village. And I've probably had about 3 villages supporting me along the way.
Oh, that's truly wonderful. Terry, I really, really appreciate it. And I cannot wait to see what you create and to hear other stories from SSP students who have been through the program. I encourage anyone who's interested to look into the SSP program. I think that it's a phenomenal program, and we'll put in the chat, in the notes, information about the program so that people can find out more and find out if they can find ways in their own lives of helping out. But before we go, I just want to say thank you so much for sharing your story and for your time.
Thank you for having me, Adam.